Hi and welcome to MhM Media Reacts. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the big news from E3 2016 that Crash Bandicoot's original trilogy will be remastered for PS4. I'm Kevin Allen, and joining me today is Christopher McDonald.
Hey.
Okay, let's get to it then. What did you think of that news from E3?
It's definitely good news for the Crash franchise. Crash had a bit of a troubled history after Naughty Dog has stepped away from it. After they left with the third game, a lot of the world kind of went with them. It had, I think, 3 games under Activision owning the IP, which didn't have the worst reception in the world, but it just didn't have the same brand strength and kind of faded away. We've seen that a lot of people wanted it back for a while now, and that's kind of not gone down very well when there's been, perceived teasing of that from Sony. But it's definitely good that something is happening with the brand now.
Yeah, it's definitely great. As you alluded to, we had the trolling by Sean Layden at E3 last year where he appeared on stage in a Crash Bandicoot shirt. A lot of people really weren't happy about that at the time, but it's good to see that actually Crash Bandicoot was in Sony's plans, as we've now learned. I know a lot of people at the time were disappointed with the news, but it was actually a reason for optimism because now we can see if, with the success of these remasters once they come out, possibly Sony would then look to continue the franchise because Crash Bandicoot would be more relevant again in today's standings. How do you think that a Crash Bandicoot game would be handled in 2017 or so?
It's a very difficult question, especially because we're going to have these remasters first. And Crash, as a platformer, was very different from a lot of other ones. It was one of the earliest 3D platformers, and because of that, you had this very straightforward momentum for most of the levels. You had this always moving forward, and you were taking platforming, but what was slightly awkward, but you forgave it at the time because we didn't have a lot of 3D platforming, so it was kind of early forays in there, but you had issues in that you're taking a lot of forward jumps that you don't have the depth perception to really accurately judge, and it could get very hard to work out the game's visual cues of how far away something was and how much of a jump it wanted you to take, whether it wanted a big jump or a small jump. That got especially precarious when you had levels that had platforms that weren't safe to be standing on for a length of time and you couldn't just assess what you needed to do. But the game was also very unforgiving at that, and I don't know if people remember how unforgiving it was, and that it could often be very hard to judge spacing because of the design of the game. 3D is something that will definitely help that depth perception. We've seen that help games in a similar scenario before in the 3DS with Mario and such, but most people aren't going to play this game in 3D if that's even an option. It's going to be such a small part of the user base that would even play the game in that way if that's even a feature. So I wonder how that's going to factor into how people feel when they get Crash back. If that aspect is handled the same, because there's ways they might get around that. They might give you some freedom with the camera where you can have a bit more overhead or wiggle it about a bit more to kind of gauge and judge jumps we don't know. But if there's not a way to aid with that, it'll be interesting how people handle that again now as opposed to how they were with it then.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's definitely an interesting thought because with Crash Bandicoot having been away for so long, people are ultimately going to be looking for the familiar. But the question is, how familiar are they with the franchise at this point? After so long, it's possible that they will have forgotten these elements of the game, and as you say, how unforgiving it could be. So it's definitely an interesting thought looking forward. I'm going to do a cut here. If anything else to add?
Okay. Yeah, and speaking of looking forward, something else to keep in mind is we don't know who's developing the remasters, and if these go well, we don't know who will be developing the final game. Well, any renewed games, I mean. Obviously, a lot of people will want Naughty Dog. I especially doubt we'll get them for the remasters. I think they've got a lot on their plate at the moment already. But that could be why we have so little beyond the announcement itself. But if this goes down well and we see new games, I think people definitely will want Naughty Dog on it. But what is good to keep in perspective is the director of all the Crash games, while they were under Naughty Dog, is no longer at Naughty Dog. He hasn't been there for years. He left before Uncharted, if I remember correctly. and he definitely wasn't involved in any of their projects if he was still there by the time of Uncharted. And even beyond him, there's been such a huge staff turnover, a couple of exoduses, that the Naughty Dog of now is very different of the Naughty Dog of then, and they haven't had experience in making a platformer in years. Almost 10 years, actually, because the PS3 is almost 10 years old now. So Naughty Dog haven't really dipped their toe in that type of game in so long. I don't know if they would be the right studio. I'd definitely be interested in seeing them get back to doing platformers with the staff they have now and try out different kind of games from what they've been doing. But I don't necessarily know if they're the ideal developers.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see who exactly is handling the remasters and then a future new Crash game. Sony does have a great stable of internal development studios, so certainly there would be a reason for optimism there. But what's unclear at the moment is the role that Activision is playing in all of this. You know, what sort of say do they have on this? As far as I can tell, the rights haven't fully been handed over. I don't think Activision would do that. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see looking forward. But as for now, it's a reason for optimism. We're getting Crash back after so long. We'll definitely be sure to keep following that as it progresses. That was our thoughts on Crash Bandicoot's reveal at E3 2016. What did you think? As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.